Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So this is the third part of the fourth part series of my interview with Dr. Atasha Jordan, and in today's episode we discuss when spirituality becomes hyper-religiosity. So stay tuned and keep watching. But how can also practitioners be mindful of when spiritual health is not a mental health issue?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So you said when spiritual health is not a mental health issue, do you mean like when someone's spiritual beliefs or maybe like their devotion to their faith is not like a pathologic issue? Is that
Yes,
yeah?
that's what I meant.
Yeah, so no, that's actually a very, very important question. And there's this concept of like hyperreligiosity, which is very common when we're thinking about mental illness. That tends to be more prominent when we're thinking about like bipolar disorder. It can be wrapped into the mania picture when someone is manic. Something else that it tends to be common in is in psychosis. So when someone has a disturbed perception of reality, that sometimes hyperreligiosity can play into there. And when I say hyper religiosity, it's the idea that someone's fixation on basically religious principles or their faith is beyond that which I struggle to say normal, but it's beyond what is typical for that faith or even for that person more so, as I think probably the best way to think about it. So when we are thinking about differentiating between the idea of a devoted person and now thinking of the spectrum from devotion going all the way across now to hyper religiosity, where you have gone beyond what is deemed as following the principles of your scripture. So whether that's the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, whatever that is for you, when you are beyond what is noted to be devotion from those texts, that's where the questions come to play of now is this person beyond and in a hyper religious state. I think a lot of that too kind of depends on the perception. So sometimes people will have, so grandeur, the idea of you feeling like that hyper religiosity might relate back to someone thinking that they are God or that they are directly communicating, not necessarily in a spiritual way, but in a literal way with God. And so those are some of the examples. And I think what's important at the bottom of that for us to be able to recognize that in our patients is to ask the question, what is the normal spiritual health of this patient? And how does that compare to where they are right now? Ways to do that. Collateral in psychiatry is probably one of the most important things that we can do. It's getting information from people who know this patient best. So whether that's friends, family members, things like that, when you see someone, and let's say that this patient, and I kind of had a case like this before, where someone's like praying, let's say it's 40, 50 times a day, when usually their prayer is more so like a 3, 4, 5 times a day type thing. You don't know that unless you know what the patient's baseline is, and you have to ask. And I think that's probably actually one of the things that's maybe lacking in a lot of training, of that we are not systematically taught to ask about a person's religious background in the way that we are systematically taught to ask about suicidality or hallucinations or things like that.
Wow, those are very important questions
Mm-hmm.
to ask about. And like you said, uh, being informed about what their baseline is and when it becomes a concern. And so, how, I guess my next question is more so like, for example, Kanye West, he's been public about, or he's shared publicly that he has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
And, I think that there have been moments where people have questioned whether he is okay. But there's also been moments where he's had very marked, important lives. For instance, when he said when he started the Sunday services tours, and he's been more like so connected to God, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and like he's used his creativity to worship God and things like that. And I think a lot of people supported him, but then there were other people who kind of attributed that to a manic episode. And so I think that this is very important actually to talk about, because cultural incompetence should also include spirituality, and how somebody's spirituality can actually help them heal or cope with their mental health issues. So my question to you is, like, how does because you have, like you said yourself, you have also your own faith background, and so how can as practitioners in a mental health field, how can we be more mindful of that? And actually, I like what you said about baseline. And so how can we also, like, not pathologize somebody's spiritual beliefs in that regard?
Yeah, so I think it really is going back to the idea of understanding what is normal for that person and that person's spiritual context. So whether that is Buddhism, someone who's Christian, Jewish, knowing that culture, or at least the basics about it, or asking them about what that means to them, comparing to what it is that family says about it. I think that's really the most important thing. I think there's some other elements that I'll share, where the way there's different frameworks, I think, that exist for spiritual health, but the one that I have found to be very identifiable, you're thinking about the idea that spiritual health is looking at a person's sense of self, their sense of purpose, and then thinking about also their connection to others, nature, and to God or their higher power. So when you're thinking about spiritual health from that standpoint, I think it's really important for us to ask our patients, is spirituality important? Or what role does spirituality or faith play in your life? But then how does that actually impact the decisions that you make or the supports that you have?
These conversations are so important for us to have, and I hope that you are learning as much as I am through this series. Stay tuned for the fourth and last episode next week, and please subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell to be notified of new videos. Bye.